This isn't some hard-boiled, disgruntled, Rage Against the Machine junior detective who you see in the movies. He's not Dirty Harry.
I love the story of Denis being a little boy and having his own case files and having a little notebook where he would read about a crime in the newspaper and then he would reverse engineer it like a Perry Mason novel.
After my father died, I knew the diaries were in the basement because I'd seen them. They were not. You didn't ask to read them, you didn't ask to touch them, but you knew they were there. I asked my mom if I could have them, and she goes, I want you to take all that stuff because I don't like it in the house. I never liked it in the house. And so I was rummaging around, and I had the diaries, and then I found 3 boxes of files with all the cases he'd been working on. It was the most fascinating reading I ever read in my life. It's history, but it's not dated history. It's relevant, and it's still relevant to some people.
It's almost like he had some sort of sixth sense that in the future we wouldn't be able to get at that information, and he still wanted us to be able to continue his work after he died. So the fact that he took it home and he made it accessible to Mike Arnfield, that he made it accessible to me, I think really speaks to his legacy, which is about getting the cases solved. It's not about ego, it's not about closing ranks in a police department. It's really about the focus is on the victims and the families.
Many of these cases were investigated by several agencies working in collaboration, and one agency would think that the other one was the main documentarian, that they held the main records, that they were the lead investigators, they were the custodian of records. And in the fray, many of these materials were lost. I guess what stuck out to me the most was their shock and awe at what was happening, but their lack of facility with language and vocabulary to describe the pure evil that was going on. So they didn't have terms at their disposal like paraphilia or sexual psychopath.
History became alive. I could see him getting in his car, going after somebody. I could remember it as a kid growing up. I knew these files when I saw them would show that, and it did. It just showed that he really cared. He wanted these things not forgotten and put in another thing. They didn't have the tools back in the 70s that they have now. They didn't have DNA. It was a different operation, and the fingerprinting wasn't there as much anymore because the guys wore gloves because they knew that they could be found out.
Denis Alsop was one of only 2 identification officers in the province. So the work he was doing was really groundbreaking forensic work that no one else was taking on. He had specialized training that you couldn't find outside of a major center like Toronto, right? So when it came to the bad guys of Southwestern Ontario, he's really their biggest enemy. And it's not because he's a tough guy. It's not because he's the quickest shooter. He's not Clint Eastwood kind of a cop, right? The reason that Alsop is so amazing is his mind.
In '48, he was fortunate enough to join the OPP. And in '49, he went to police college, and then he graduated at the top of his class. And we was stationed in Ingersoll, where I was born. In '54, he was promoted to corporal, and that was unheard of because nobody was ever promoted to corporal after 4 years. And he set up an identification area. And so, as Mike alluded to, he was a trailblazer because they didn't do that stuff beforehand. In '63, the OPP set up a new division, a new job, and that was detective sergeant, and he was one of the first detective sergeants, and every district had one.
There really were no adequacy standards for how to conduct a homicide investigation. At the time, many investigations were scattershot, off the cuff. So he was troubleshooting and developing new ways of classifying criminal offenders, but at the same time, he was also, I think, charting a new course for let's clean up our act. Like, let's Let's professionalize homicide investigation.
I noticed that years after something had happened, there'd be a note in his diary that he had gone back to that old case, that he had followed up on something.
He enjoyed really the safecrackers and the bank robbers. He understood them. He didn't enjoy the guys that are killing people for self-gratification because it was foreign to him. Couldn't understand it, and he really detested those people, and you read that in the diary. He would always say he went to the jail to discuss something with some criminal. And I'm going, this is a discussion, give me a break. You don't sit there and discuss, but that's the way he worded it. When he was going to the jail to visit people that he thought were killing these kids, it was interrogation. He detested them.
During this period, I think there was a sense of London being Main Street Canada, this being a wholesome place where you can leave your doors unlocked, you can all come downtown to Victoria Park and watch the Christmas lights come on. That's complete bullshit.
London was very white. It was very conservative. It was very Protestant. It was the definition of a waspy place. It was the same as it had been in the 1880s. So when it comes to crime, we just don't talk about those things. So Denis was working with really the underbelly of a very oppressive system.
My father was very religious, and he would go to church on Sunday, and he would always sit there and never leave. He'd drive us nuts. Let's go home. But after I was reading the diaries, I go, that man was carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders. He really needed, and prayer helped him.
Denis's story isn't just Denis's story. Denis's story is the story of all the people he tried to help. And if he'd had the tools we have today, the forensic tools, the social media tools, all of that stuff, I think he would have been in heaven. He would have been able to solve every crime that came across his desk.
He always said, these cases are not unsolved, they're just uncharted.
This is a guy that was an intelligence operative in World War II. He's used to seeing symbols and signs and ciphers, and is a guy who's tenacious, who doesn't let things go. So he looked at these crimes through a lens through which many of his peers wouldn't.
And it didn't always have an answer, but it also said that people cared, and they worked diligently on these things. When he died in 2012, lots of people went to his funeral. He was really well liked, but there was very few cops because he had outlived most of his buddies, and most of the people did not know he was an OPP officer. It was the type of person he was, and I was very proud to be his son, and I'm really happy that I'm able to tell a bit of his story because I think he really was the neatest cop out there.